Good afternoon from a grey, cold but dry Amsterdam. I'm currently walking in the Vondelpark, which is probably the most well-known park in Amsterdam. It's a great park for people watching, for dog watching, for bike watching. There's of course lots of bikes going through. Like, not just is it a park, it is also a main biking thoroughfare from the southwest into the city centre. There's also Picasso, original Picasso sculpture here in the park, in the centre, and there's actually quite a lot of kind of wildness to the park. It was created in 1860s by privately owned by some of the elites of Amsterdam who wanted somewhere nice to go for a walk of the weekend, and then given to the city in the 1960s. To the south of the park, and just kind of where there are some of the most elite houses of the city, the Vondelpark area is probably one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive, in the whole of the Netherlands. And there's some absolutely beautiful houses, and it's also a nice area to walk and stroll through if you feel like a bit of jealously watching some of the loveliest houses in the city.
Hello, you're listening to Right So, Off We Go, the podcast where you get the inside track on destinations worldwide. I'm Ailish Ford, and today we're off to Amsterdam, where I chat with Dubliner Danny Trench Bowles. He shares his in-depth knowledge of the city and gives me hints and tips on what to see and do. Coming up, Danny encourages me to visit a famous flea market,
the Haarlem, which is the biggest flea market in Europe, which is once a weekend every month, and that's a great day out on there and pick up a few nice things.
He describes the experience of King's Day in Amsterdam.
But it's really fun just walking around the city, everyone dressed in the orange, there are lots of boats on the canal, and lots of house parties going on kind of at every square or every door, and people playing music out in the street.
And tells me about a great day trip outside of the city.
You could go to Haarlem, which is only about 20 minutes train away. Like really historically important city, kind of much more manageable than Amsterdam, can be walked around in a couple of hours. Some lovely museums there as well.
We started our chat with Danny telling me how he came to be in Amsterdam and how he finds living there.
I wanted to do a particular master's degree, and I was choosing between Amsterdam and a couple of other places, but Amsterdam is, it's such a great city. I knew it from visiting myself anyway, and that I was happy to take up the opportunity to study here, and it was a really great city to be a student, though becoming more difficult with prices and kind of housing situation. Then the second time what brought me back, it's particularly, having been in a couple of years in Dublin with my partner, we were feeling that we weren't quite in love with Dublin enough to settle down there. We wanted to go back to Amsterdam because this is where we met, and we were able to come over. Both of our jobs made it happen that we could come over. And listen, like, with the reason why you want to come back is just the quality of life is so high, especially compared to Dublin. It's like it feels so much easier to get around, particularly with the bikes, but kind of the planning of the city makes it a lot more accessible, more neighborhoody. You don't need to go into the centre always. Actually, we tend to avoid the centre a lot because there's so much to do in all our little neighbourhoods, and I find just it's so well planned and so well put together, I think, as a city, that it means it's always a nice balance of residential and business and restaurants and bars, and you're never that far away from things to do, and just it just makes it so much easier to kind of, there's so much at your doorstep. It makes it easier to get out of the house, and really that's what Dutch people do. They really tend to, houses are pretty relatively small in Amsterdam, so people really enjoy the space and the public realm as their own, and that's I think one thing I really love about it. People really get out and enjoy the space that we have.
Okay, and what would you say, Danny, is the main difference between living there and living in Ireland?
I kind of touched on it there. I think for me it's the accessibility factor. Like in Dublin, that's what I can compare it to, does feel if you want to meet up with someone, it feels like a bit more of a hurdle to jump in terms of, it'll take however long to get into the city centre, and then then we'll need to make our own ways back home, wherever. Much more, suburban living, I guess. Whereas here, it feels super handy to hop on your bike, and within 5-10 minutes, you're with your friends, you're out, and it's also accessible. You've cinemas within a couple of minutes cycle. You have lots of bars and restaurant options here. It all feels very close and handy, and accessible. I think for such a well-known city like it is, it's not that much more in population as Dublin, in a much smaller area. And the other thing is, the Netherlands in general is very compact. It's the size of, about half the size of the island of Ireland.
Yes.
So about 3 times the population. And even the other cities, we can talk about Rotterdam and Utrecht and Leiden, they're all, half an hour, 45 minutes per train away. It's all very compact and all quite, accessible, I'd say.
So, Danny, I always ask my guest to choose a book and film that capture the essence of the place we're visiting. So, what book have you chosen?
I'm a history fan, so I would read quite a few history books in particular. And there's a book by a Dutch journalist called Herengracht called Amsterdam, or a small history of Amsterdam, which I think was one of my favorites about the city. Really tells a great story from the founding of the city in the 1200s, I think, all the way to kind of present day, taking little vignettes, little characters, people, real people that is, and telling their story in a way that really tells the whole story of the city. And it really tells, I think, gives you a good picture of what Amsterdam is like, what it's known for, and what makes it tick. Kind of, I'd recommend that one to go into the city and the history of it in particular.
And then what about TV or cinema? Any film or TV series that you think gives a good sense of the place?
Yeah, I was thinking of this one, and for such a well-known city and such a cosmopolitan city, it feels slightly underutilized somewhat in TV and film. Now, people might be listening and thinking, listing off loads of different examples they can point to, but one that I think stands out to me, I'm a big fan of Anthony Bourdain's kind of travel writing and or travel logs and series, and he did one in Amsterdam. I forget which one. I think it stands out to me because I think he quite struggled with Amsterdam. I didn't quite like it. He was being sent to these very traditional Amsterdam brown bars. We call them, would have very traditional music being sung, and he found that all quite naff and uncomfortable. And then the other side, he was being brought to these pretty kind of hyper modern restaurants and bars that he found almost a bit soulless, a little bit. So there is that kind of the dichotomy of Amsterdam, a little bit, the very traditional, which is dying out a little bit, and the hyper modern, and new bars and restaurants are popping up all the time. That can feel a bit samey, to be honest with you. Now, it took till the end of his piece to kind of find the middle ground that he really enjoyed, and there's so much of Amsterdam in that middle ground. But I do find his understanding of Amsterdam in that show particularly good at telling kind of the different parts of Amsterdam when it comes to food, drink, and culture.
Okay. And of course, then there are the ones that maybe people might know or see, like the Diary of Anne Frank,
So,
Girl with Pearl Earring, both in books and in terms of film. So there's plenty there if people wanted to explore. And of course, there's a great music scene in Amsterdam, isn't there, Danny?
absolutely. I think there's kind of, again, kind of similar to the last point, is like lots of multi-layers of the music scene. So there's the very traditional singers like Johnny Jordaan and André Hazes, who would be well-known Dutch singers singing very much like what we call like life songs about life, singing about sitting at the bar in particular, and kind of contemplating life. And there's one particular one called Life, or in Dutch Leef, by André Hazes Jr., which is about a man sitting at the bar, so talking about his life, drunk, and what went through, and that's a big favorite of Dutch people here. One, like, there's also like lots of great dance music, electronic music from Amsterdam, great nightlife. One that stands out to me, not actually a Dutch song, but there's a song by Stardust called "Music Sounds Better with You," or one of them is from Daft Punk. But I do remember, it's one particular night. I remember this song was playing at the house party I was at before, and then we went to the bar and I was playing there, and then after another bar and I was playing there, and I do remember it kind of hearing 4 or 5 different times in different areas, different locations that night. It's a real fan favorite of Amsterdam. It's one that you'll keep on hearing. Yeah.
Okay. And now, I know you spoke a little bit earlier when you were talking about the book that you've chosen about the city's history, and it's a very rich history, isn't it?
Sorry.
Are there any stories from its past that particularly interest you?
So I actually used to do tours, canal tours in Amsterdam as part of the Heineken experience, the kind of Heineken brewery, which also kind of, after you would do the Heineken experience, you can get on a boat and do a tour through the city. So I've quite a few, and there's ones that I would kind of particularly like to tell.
Yeah.
Particular one that stands out to me is the story of Paradiso, which is one of the most famous music venues now in Amsterdam. In the 1870s, it was founded as a church, or indeed, it was a church of the Vrije Gemeente, it was like a free church, or so it was. Somewhat, it was religious but anti-religious, so it didn't call itself a church. It wasn't kind of institutionalized, but it was, you could bring whatever kind of your religiosity to this church and kind of praise and do blessings and things. But it was it's not kind of a structured religion, and I think that kind of tells a story already of the kind of the traditional mixing with the modern, the kind of the scientific almost. And actually part of it was like celebrating music and art at this church is kind of as part of the religion. But it was built much too big, and the religion was not taken up, and it was kind of in disrepair as a church. And it was then taken over by squatters in the 1960s and became kind of the heart of the kind of hippie, more liberal shift, progressive shift in Amsterdam. And 1960s and 70s, kind of very famous kind of decades in Amsterdam, like being the heart of the hippie movement, or one of the hearts indeed. And some of the best artists in the world were coming there, and it became this kind of community space where there was lots of amazing art, lots of amazing music being shown or being played. And now, indeed, it is still kind of its own separate thing, called the Paradiso, and you go there, there's gigs there every night, and you pay a membership in order to go. And it's such a beautiful venue for music. I was recently there to see Lankum, and just beautiful to kind of acoustics of a church, lots of nice stained glass, and just an amazing kind of venue for music.
And what about the people, Danny? Any encounters with them that show what they're like? Because there is a kind of impression about Dutch people that they can be very blunt. Do you find that, or how do you find them?
I think that impression, I'm certainly aware of that impression of them being very direct, and almost to there's lots of kind of memes, social media that go around social media, like the idea being Dutch being very direct, almost kind of missing social cues, and there's no kind of, like really just on the nose.
Yeah.
I don't get that sense so much from them. And I think generally you'd find maybe in Amsterdam, or those living in Amsterdam or from Amsterdam, might be a bit more, I guess, cosmopolitan than Dutch people in general, let's say.
Okay.
But yes, I find them very nice, and actually I think they get on quite well with Irish in general. I think can be quite sarcastic in terms of their humour, a little bit kind of self-deprecating a little bit. So I find them quite easy generally to get on with and find kind of similarities. I think one thing they don't do is good service. That is one thing that's it's lacking in I'd say, yeah, I'll talk about it, yeah, in Amsterdam.
Mm.
And by that I mean I do like it does often feel one, they're like, yeah, they're not very they're not very serving. If you go to a bar or go to a restaurant, you can expect to wait quite a while. People will
Right.
take their time, whatever time they need. And often I remember when I worked on in an Irish pub here in Amsterdam, I would rush around, kind of getting quite stressed that we had a terrace. If it was summer day, always super full. And there's only a couple of us managing the terrace and running around getting things. And you ask, oh, where's my XYZ? And I do remember one time I was saying, yeah, I don't know, I think it's coming, I hope it's coming. And someone on the table beside a Dutch guy says, don't worry, to me, don't worry, it'll come when it comes. And saying it, kind of covering me, saying it to the other table. So there is also, they're used to the not necessarily the best, quickest service. You know, it
Like,
is maybe a bit of a, yeah,
yeah.
but it can be a struggle, and the you should expect going to restaurants or going to bars in particular to not be waited on hand and foot, let's say.
Okay. And then, of course, speaking of restaurants, food is such an important part of any culture. Is there a food culture in Amsterdam? Typical Amsterdam dishes I can try when I visit?
Yeah, there is, of course. I think um, Netherlands in general gets a kind of get bad rap for its perceived lack of food culture. What Amsterdam and Netherlands does really well is bar snacks, deep fried bitter ball in particular, deep fried snacks to have while you're having your beer, is one thing where they do very well. Like all a bar needs is a deep fat fryer, and they've got the kind of the full selection of snacks, and every bar you'll go into will have the same kind of snacks to be selected from. Bitterballen, which are these kind of deep fried kind of beef meatballs almost. You'd have kastengels, which are kind of cheese fingers, like kind of deep fried cheese sticks. Spring rolls as well. And I do find it actually quite endearing how you'll get the same menu, same snacks in every bar, and still young and old Dutch will be super excited. Their eyes will light up when they get their bitterballen or kastengels, and as if it's like, a big surprise. So that's one thing I think they do very well.
Okay.
And the other thing I call it is Indonesian food. Some really, really nice Indonesian food, because Indonesia used to be a colony of the Netherlands.
Oh, of
And
course, yeah.
yeah, so there's a lot of Indonesian people living in the Netherlands, and they've set up some really nice restaurants. And one thing you do when you go to these restaurants is get something called a rice tafel or a rice table, which is you pay however much, maybe some of the more cheaper places, 25 per person, could be up to 40, 45 per person. And they just
Yeah.
bring out little dishes of every kind of most things on their menu. And you get to taste a bit of everything. So it's one thing I'd really recommend for people who are coming to Amsterdam is to go to an Indonesian restaurant and get the rice tafel.
Okay, and just because we're recording this on the run up to Christmas, are there any Christmas markets in Amsterdam?
I think, unfortunately, Amsterdam doesn't do Christmas very well. I think, and
Okay.
I think it's a bit of a missed opportunity, because it's a really beautiful and Christmassy looking town at the best of times, and there's lots of nice lights up as you go around. But market's pretty poor actually. I would probably not come around Christmas time or winter
Just
time.
going to ask you, what's the best time of year to visit? So not winter.
I would say not. Yeah,
Okay.
it can be absolutely beautiful, but it's not necessarily Christmassy. If
Yes.
if that's what you're looking for. And sure, the weather, not not
Not
unlike
great.
Ireland,
Yeah.
gets a bit very cold and very wet and very windy. And I would say the Dutch are quite good at hibernating. In terms of when it comes to the winter time, staying in. And then as soon as the sun comes back in March, February, the
Mm.
terraces will be full again. And if there's
Right.
a bit of sunlight, and it's 10 degrees plus, people will be out on the terrace soaking up the vitamin D that they can. So I would actually recommend maybe going out, leaving winter, going into springtime would be a lovely time to visit.
Yes.
April. And I'd also know just April 27 is the national holiday of the Netherlands called King's Day, where everyone wears orange and the city it's like nowhere else. It's really a fun day out. Everyone's wearing orange. Everyone kind of serves beers or drinks or food from their own houses, and you'll also kind of people will charge you a couple of euro to go inside the house to use the bathroom, because that'll often be needed. So there's a bit of kind of, and there's lots of selling your stuff out in the street. It's kind of, I think, traditionally like a tax-free day, so you can sell kind of whatever you want. But it's really fun just walking around the city. Everyone dressed in the orange. Lots of canal boats, or lots of boats on the canal, and lots of house parties going on kind of at every square or every door, and people playing music out in the street. It's a really fun day. I'd recommend people to visit then in particular.
27th of April. So we've all got that in our diaries now. So Danny, if you had only one day in Amsterdam, how would you spend it? What would you see and do? What for you would be the ideal day?
Well, yeah, good question. I would, let's say we start off with a coffee. Particularly recommend Back to Black, which is a lovely cafe, not to be confused with a coffee shop, which of course is something different in the Netherlands. There's, maybe you'd go for a walk in the Vondelpark. Is one of my favorite parks. It's an old gas works as well. So you walk around the park, lots of nice people watching, but there's also nice cafes and shops in the park itself. From there, you could go to the Jordaan, which is the most kind of, let's say, traditional Amsterdam area of the city. On Mondays and Saturdays, there's a really nice market there, food and textiles market, Noordermarkt, it's called. Great place to eat, great, like in the market, and some really great food there and suppliers there. Right beside that square where the market's on is the Winkel 43, which does one of the best apple pies in the city. Be prepared to queue, but really delicious apple pie. And their apple pie is slightly different to what we would call apple pie. It's a lot more biscuity, the actual kind of encasing, and there's like proper chunks of apple in there. Really tasty, and served with lots of whipped cream. Lovely bar in the same area called P96, which is on the Prinsengracht canal, which is a really nice canal. You'd walk down that canal, you'd see lots of lovely houses. It's kind of very typical Amsterdam canal. It's also the canal with the Anne Frank house. Around there, you'd go to the 9 Streets, the Negenstraatjes, which is the best shopping area. Lots of boutique places, as well as kind of your traditional high street stores, but nicer than the Amsterdam shopping, the high street in the center of Amsterdam. You could then from there keep on kind of walking south. So we've kind of started in the north and we're walking south towards the Museumplein, which is, as I said before, a square with lots of different museums. The Rijksmuseum is there, the Van Gogh Museum is there, and also the Stedelijk Museum is there, which is the modern art. And I would suggest there, especially if you're there for a weekend, Van Gogh and Rijksmuseum can be a lot and quite intense, quite full on the weekend, and there's a lot to take in both of them. Stedelijk is a bit, fewer people, bit more space for yourself to really enjoy it, and it's always nicely curated. From there, go for dinner. Maybe you're hungry now. I mentioned the Indonesian restaurant. One particular favorite of mine is called Kartika, which is on the Overtoom, all kind of again in the same area. And then not far away is the Paradiso, which is the music venue I mentioned. Go check out a gig there. And there's a couple of really nice bars around there, particularly Cafe Brecht, which is quite, really nice bar, very cozy, warm. Every chair is slightly different, kind of a real eclectic style. That would be my recommendation for a day out.
Listening to you there talking about the canals, and I know in some of our other episodes, swimming is something that often comes up.
Oh, yeah.
In the New York episode, we were talking about swimming in Rockaway Beach. In the London episode, we talked about swimming in the ponds in London's parks. Do people swim in the canals in Amsterdam?
They do. I have done, but I wouldn't necessarily do it again. Like they're certainly not the cleanest. You do it because it's so warm that you need to do it, but no, it wouldn't be necessarily a standard thing. There's one particularly cleaner part of the canals would be around the Olympic Stadium in the southwest. There's a nice place to swim there because that actually leads into the Nieuwemeer, which is a lake, and that's where I would go swim. Now, I wouldn't do it in December, but when it comes to spring, summertime, actually a really nice place to swim, and it feels quite wild. You're kind of into a forested area, but you're only about 20 minutes cycle from the center of the city, and there's a nice pier that you can jump off. That would be a very popular swimming spot. A bit nicer, I think, than the canals.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah.
You can also swim in the river Amstel,
Okay.
on the other side of the city, and sure, the sea is not that far away. About 40 minutes by train to Zandvoort. You'll be on the sea, and there's some nice kind of beaches and beach clubs and beach bars along the beach there.
Which you don't hear people talk about actually when they talk about Amsterdam. So that's a very nice tip. And tell me, Danny, are there any sites that you'd skip? You know, any places that are often recommended but you think really aren't worth bothering about?
Sure. I think the one thing that kind of people can get wrong with Amsterdam, if they're here for a weekend, they stay very much in the city centre. As I said, I kind of avoid the city centre as much as I can. And by city centre, I'm talking about kind of the central station, and you walk down to Dam Square, which is the biggest square. There's also the Rembrandt Square, Rembrandtplein, and Leidseplein, to the kind of more kind of bigger entertainment, nightlife squares. I tend to avoid those. And the red light district, which is there right in the middle. Like you can come straight out of the train station and you head straight to the red light district. I'd avoid that. Kind of seedy, not the nicest kind of tourists who would go there. Sure, it is interesting in a way, but you can be there for a couple of minutes and then you've had plenty of it.
Okay. And then if you had 3 days, what would you add to that ideal day?
I would go exploring in the north of the city. So when you arrive into Amsterdam, if you go to Central Station, pretty much the whole city is south of that station. You get out the main entrance and kind of you walk into the city. But if you walk out the other way, north, there is a river right there, and there's a free ferry that goes, I think, all night, that just goes across the water, and you would go right there and then you're into the north of the city. It's totally different, a lot more industrial. You're very quickly a couple of minutes cycle into kind of more, suburban, more residential neighborhoods. And it feels like you're in a different place completely, but still you're so close to Amsterdam. It's really kind of, let's say, up and coming. There's more and more places opening there. Lots of bakeries, cafes, restaurants opening. There is the Haarlem, which is the biggest flea market in Europe, which is once a weekend every month, and that's a great day out. I'll go there and pick up a few nice things. And one of my favorite bars is called Het Sluisje, the Cafe Het Sluisje, which is on a lock, on a canal. It's like, feels really like you're in a totally different town, and we're again only 15 minutes cycle to the center of Amsterdam. It's really special to have both of those things. So I'd really recommend exploring Nord. I didn't mention it kind of as part of my main day, because if you're there for a weekend, I wouldn't recommend going to the Rijksmuseum, because there's so much to see in that museum, and you'd feel maybe a bit rushed, and there's lots of people there. It's super popular. But if you're there during the week, I'd recommend to go when it's a bit quieter and really taking your time with it. And around there, you'd also walk through the Vondelpark, which is one of the most famous parks of Amsterdam. And if you wanted to do a kind of little smaller day trip or half day trip rather, you could go to Haarlem, which is only about 20 minutes train away. Like really historically important city, and kind of much more manageable than Amsterdam. Can be walked around in a couple of hours. Some lovely museums there as well, but sees a bit different kind of part of the Netherlands. Can be nice for a day trip. I'd recommend going out there if you had the time.
Absolutely. Now, Danny, we love hidden gems on this podcast, so, slightly unusual recommendations. So what would your 3 top picks of things to see or do that you won't always find in a guidebook?
So I've mentioned a few already. So I would say the Nieuwemeer, the lake, is really, really, really nice. Go swimming, also go walking. Nord, I mentioned a few bars. I also mentioned another one called Café de Seuvel in the north area. I really recommend going there. You might still see it in a guidebook, but rather than going on the canal tours, I'd really
Yeah.
recommend renting your own boat. They're
Okay.
kind of expensive. You'd pay about €100 for 4 hours, on their basic boat. But you really get a different sense of the city seeing it from the canal. And even though the canals are very super busy, it can look a bit stressful to be going on the boat.
I was just thinking that.
It's going
Yeah.
really slow, and yeah, it's everyone else knows what they're doing at least, so they'll make room. I'd recommend that. One thing that there's lots of here in Amsterdam is a kind of second-hand stores. Like in Dublin, we'd have like
Nice.
charity shops.
Yeah.
In Amsterdam, we have kringloopwinkel, which are kind of you would call a kringloopwinkel if you wanted your house emptied in very quick time. So they would come and do it for free and take this stuff in. So it's gonna be fun to kind of search for a few hidden gems
Yeah.
in those shops.
Absolutely.
So keep an eye out for those. And yeah, there's one actually. I've kind of going against what I said in terms of avoiding the city centre. There's a really old bar, it's from the 1600s, called Proef Lokaal Wynand van Fokking.
Okay.
And it is just beside the Dam Square, kind of hidden away. But you walk in and there's nowhere to sit really, but they do have like a whole bar full of their own made liqueurs of lots of different flavors. So you walk
Yeah.
in and the guy behind the bar says, what flavors do you tend to like? Is it like more bitter? Do you prefer sweeter? And he'll kind of ask you a number of questions and then pick a flavor for you. And then you drink it there in a traditional kind of Dutch shot glass. That's a fun
Lovely.
kind of experience, and you can do it kind of straight from the train station. It's right there, right in the centre of the city.
Okay, that sounds like a great tip.
Mm.
And now I know you said that if you had time to go on an excursion outside of the city, that you'd recommend Haarlem. Anywhere else that people could go that's not too far away?
Yeah, there's so many because I say like it's all so accessible in the Netherlands. Utrecht is a lovely city, about 30 minutes away.
Right.
I would recommend out of all of them Rotterdam because it is so different to
Okay.
the other cities. So Utrecht, Haarlem, really very cute cities, lots of canals, kind of look quite similar. I would say, and also look quite similar to certain parts of Amsterdam as well. Rotterdam is completely different. Because it was suffered a lot more during World War II. So it's a lot more modern buildings, but really interesting architecture, a different type of architecture, lots of public art on the street, and it's also much wider streets because the streets were made not as old as they are in Amsterdam, where they're very narrow. So yeah, it's a different vibe and sensibility altogether. But it's only 45 minutes, I guess, down the road on the train, and kind of can give you a different sense of the country.
Fabulous. So now we've got to our quickfire round.
Mm-hmm.
Best way to get around?
Very easy. That one is cycling. It may look quite intense because there's so many bikes around, but once you've done it a couple of times, so I would start at a quieter time, maybe start in the morning. Once you've done it a couple of times, you'll get the hang of it completely fine.
Okay. Best place to stay?
I'd suggest to stay in the west. So areas in particular would be De Barsjes or around the Vondelpark area.
Okay. Best place for a coffee? Now, I know you gave us a couple there
Yeah.
earlier.
Luckily, I live right beside one of my favourite ones. It's called Pipes and Beans, which is a Colombian cafe in particular. Really eclectic kind of style of furniture, lots of really nice coffee, Colombian coffee. They actually use Back to Black coffee in their stores, and Back to Black is the cafe I mentioned earlier. So I'd recommend particularly Back to Black or Pipes and Beans.
Okay. Best place for a drink?
Do I only get one, or can I mention food?
You can mention a few.
This one I know plenty about. One I really mention is for a kind of traditional Amsterdam bars, Cafe Hans, which is in the southwest of the city, very close to the Vondelpark. Cafe Brecht I mentioned before. In the centre of the city, to find a kind of nice bar, which is not kind of harder to find in the centre, I'd go to 8 Cafe Skek, which is actually owned by a student association. Really, really nice bar. Again, right in the centre of the city. You can get to the train station from about 3 minutes from there.
I love
And Best for a Guinness would be the Gouden Florijn, so the golden florin, which is on the Rozengracht.
Okay, we've got lots to choose from there.
Mm-hmm.
So, your favorite restaurant, Danny?
I'll give you two, one kind of more upscale and one less upscale. Tortoran Island, which translates as Lighthouse Island, is probably the best eating experience I've ever had. It's a real experiential. You get a boat from the center of Amsterdam, and you start your kind of courses on the boat. You start with a few snacks and beers or drinks on the boat, and you go to an island which is fairly well. There's one house on that island, but there's also this beautiful greenhouse where they serve the food, and you got a 360 view of water all around you, and then you have a couple of courses there, and then you can walk around the island, which is animals and sheep grazing, and then on the boat back you get your dessert and whatever else and your coffee. Like, it's a full day, but I really would highly recommend it. For more downscale, let's say, the other kind of food they do really well here is Surinamese food. Indonesia was a colony, so is Suriname, which is in the north of South America. And my favorite, and they do rotis, so kind of curries, rice, and kind of flatbreads. My favorite one is the roti shop Gieta, so Gieta, in the Debarches area. So that would, for something different, that would only be takeaway. There's very few kind of sit down Surinamese restaurants, but really nice takeaway.
Okay. Now, best photo opportunity.
Sure, there's plenty of them here, but I'd say the most traditional, and for a reason kind of the best, would be around the 9 streets, the Nagan Stratches, where you have lots of nice canals, and so you get a picture there on the bridge. Now, you'll be fighting for space with the other people trying to get this out.
Okay, well, that's sort of part of the experience, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
Best art or architecture experience.
I mentioned a few of the museums already, but I would say for the architecture, listen, like, there's nothing like cycling through Amsterdam at night in particular and looking at the canal houses. So you're cycling down the Prinsengracht or the Herengracht or any of the canals, and you're looking at the canal houses. There's always something to look at because they're all slightly different. They were all built individually, so they're all at different kind of heights, different kind of windows, and also Dutch people tend to kind of not have their curtains drawn, so you can look straight into their houses and get kind of green eyes.
We have the other half live.
Sounds to me, yes. So in particular, I'd call maybe cycling or walking down the Herengracht from which is very central again, which is but at the most northerly part of it. So you'd kind of from the Browersgracht, which is the Brewers Canal, which goes east to west, and then you'd go to the Herengracht, which goes north-south, and you walk down there, super quiet. Even though it's really central, it's a really quiet street. Walk down, cycle down, and you'll see some absolutely beautiful houses and buildings.
Oh, fabulous. Now, your best outdoor experience.
I'd mentioned there, cycling at night around Amsterdam is so much fun. Now, safe, the rain and the wind and all of that, but if you've got nice weather, there's real freedom to it. Cycling in general is just fun. I love it, but particularly around when there's kind of the roads are pretty empty and you can just cycle through. It really feels like it's my own city. You're really in control of it. And again, getting to look around, look in people's houses, look at the beautiful buildings. It's a really nice experience. So I'd save a bit of time for just wandering around on your bike around Amsterdam.
Okay. Now, best nighttime entertainment.
I'd go with Paradiso, which is the gig venue. Really, always a good selection of music going on, and such a beautiful venue, acoustically and visually as well.
Okay. Best local sports experience, Danny.
Amsterdam is a football town. Of all kind, like, it's not really that big a sporting town in general, but football is the biggest. So to the south you have the Ajax Stadium. So Ajax is the team from Amsterdam, which is the Johan Cruyff Arena. Great for day out, but I go regularly to Feyenoord, which is in Rotterdam, which is, I would say, even better experience. Again, only 45 minutes down by train.
Okay. Now, Danny, if you had room in your suitcase, what should you buy to bring home?
If you can't fit a bike, I would pick maybe some bitterballen. Bring them home, put them in the oven, put them in the air fryer, or if you have a deep fryer, and have them with some beers. Really delicious drinking food.
Lovely. And if you had to leave, what would you miss? And I guess you've had experience of that because you lived there and then you went away and now you're back.
Yeah, well, sure. From a personal level, obviously, my friends and my kind of life here in general. I think the cycling, like I in Dublin, I would have cycled everywhere, and it is a different kind of beast. You really feel like it's a bit more of a battle going onto the streets of Dublin with your bike. You really need to own the space. You need to kind of take your life into your hands a little bit. Whereas here, it is the most natural thing in the world. It's not even a form of exercise anymore. You know, it is just by far the best way to get from A to B. So yeah, that would be what I miss, the biking infrastructure.
And final question, where would the next best place to Amsterdam be?
I think I would stay in the Netherlands.
Okay.
Utrecht is a great town. Again, only half an hour away. A bit more manageable than Amsterdam, but also just as pretty. Beautiful canals, lovely quality of life there as well. Rotterdam, really like. And to go further afield, I actually lived a bit in Brussels as well. And I think Brussels gets a bad rap. I think it's a very pretty and really nice city. So I'd always recommend people to go to Brussels.
Danny, it's been such a pleasure chatting to you about Amsterdam. Thank you so much for being my guest.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I'm always happy to share my insights on Amsterdam.
I hope you enjoyed my chat with Danny. I have to admit I hadn't realised just how much there is to explore in Amsterdam, so I'll definitely be planning a trip soon. Thank you so much for listening, and if you enjoyed this episode, I'd love if you'd press follow and recommend it to a friend. I hope you'll join me next time.